So just a heads up, everyone, we are going to share this presentation with you at the end. So don't worry about like writing every single thing down. You'll get this the presentation to go over so that you have it so you can just be fully present with us and be able to absorb everything we're saying. Okay, so let's get rolling. All right, so we are going to go over the Flex track method. So losing fat and keeping it off without tracking all your food. So just a little introduction here. I'm assuming that for most of you, as you look at your health long term, that idea of health doesn't necessarily mean being tied to tracking your food forever or cutting out foods forever. And a lot of the time, we can kind of get away from the reason why we started on this journey to begin with. And the health and fitness industry really has gotten one thing right. Like you see it left and right everywhere. You know, calorie deficit's all that matters to lose weight. And yes, that may be true, but it can't be the end all be all if we really want to break free from these tools that are meant to be just that, tools to get away from long term. So we've really let calorie tracking adjustments and numbers take the human out of the process and forgotten why we want results to begin with. So I'm sure most of you here have had results tracking before, but you didn't have an exit strategy. It wasn't sustainable to continue. It took up all your mental capacity day to day, or you just had no backup plans for when you couldn't be perfect. So then it didn't last. And maybe any other option you've tried isn't very flexible. You know, maybe you cut out foods, carbs, dairy, gluten, sugar, meat, whatever it is, meal plans, fasting, all these things end up being a bit more restrictive than tracking. So then every time you fall off, you're just dragging yourself back to MyFitnessPal and repeating the same cycle. So over the next 60 minutes, we are going to show you the exact flexible tracking method we've used with our clients to get away from the on and off cycle of meal plans, rigid tracking, or cutting out foods to an intuitive, mindful, low stress food management system. So on that note, there's obviously a lot of things that work out there. Like I said, like everyone's obsessed. Calorie calorie deficit's all that matters, right? But what we need to be asking is not what's going to get you results. The question is what will maximize my physical and mental results so the things that matter will actually benefit from it. So just a little graphic from you and I'm curious, does this resonate for anyone that, maybe you honed in way too. So on the x-axis here, we have our physical results. And on the y, we have our mental. And at first, I put my 600-pound life on the left side of this, where you're doing absolutely nothing for yourself. And at first, you get in better shape, and it's making you feel better. It's making your stress come down. It's just win-win all around. But eventually, you can get to a place. I know I've been there multiple times in my life where I've taken that too far, and then all of a sudden, this journey is taking away from the rest of my life, not adding to it. So I'm curious if that resonates with anyone. Have you gotten results with a system that just wasn't gonna be realistic long term and ended up taking away from these great things in your life that you wanted to benefit instead of making them better? I'm seeing yes, 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 absolutely. And the thing is, calorie tracking isn't the problem. Just like tracking your finances, it's simply data. We love tracking. We're massive fans for it for just about everybody. It's educational, it builds awareness, it shows you through your direct experience why some foods might be better choices than others for your journey when it comes to hunger and energy. And like when you first find tracking, it's night and day. It's so much more flexible. It's like, oh my gosh, I can include graham crackers like for Herman or Oreos for me, whatever it may be, without getting off track. And it introduces you to this land of like, oh my gosh, this is such a different experience. But just like any technology, the problem is using it wrong. So if we're using it as a crutch instead of a tool, if we're using it without proper adjustments along the way, if we're ignoring simple strategies to simplify it, or if we're relying on it while ignoring our own body cues around food, or if we're just simply using it without an exit strategy to eventually leave it behind. Herman.
To that point, and I think what's so important that Brooks just highlighted, right, is that it's not that tracking in itself is inherently disordered, right? Just like anything else, and we have to kind of understand that what's so great about it is when we are learning any kind of new skill, right? Having structure, having an understanding of, am I doing this right? Am I learning? Am I growing? Is super important, because without that, it feels like, what am I missing? And unfortunately, sometimes and many times, as as humans, we love a check the box mentality. We love understanding, was this good? Was this bad? Was I right? Was I wrong? And so long term, some of these rules that we establish actually start becoming roadblocks for us to be able to actually make long-term progress. And so, if you think about it from a tracking perspective, like obviously, if we weigh and measure every single lick and bite, it's going to be the most accurate, right? But on the flip side of that, we start believing that if we're not doing that, right? If we miss a meal here or there, if we don't have our food skill, then we're actually doing it wrong, and we're not getting the results. And that is so far from the truth. And that's what, Brooks, if you scroll down, a big driver of developing kind of this all or nothing mindset, right? Which we hear a lot from clients, from people online. I know personally, I have fallen into this many times. And when you hear other people talk about it, it almost doesn't, it illogically doesn't make sense, right? And yet it's still so easy to fall into yourself. I remember, I don't know who here has done, the Beachbody days, but P90X, T25, Insanity, all those kind of, the 3 month workout plans where it's like you have 5 or 6 days of workouts. And if you just do all of those for 3 months, you look exactly like Shaun T, is what I always believed. And the amazing thing was, inherently, I would do 3 weeks, 4 weeks without missing a single day. And it was like 5 days a week, and then I was going to a corporate job afterwards. And inherently, every time I did it, I'd miss a day, right? I'd wake up feeling tired, or I was sick, or there's a long work day and I wouldn't get the workout in. And every single time that made me say, well, screw it, the rest of the program is just not worth it, right? And tracking food in many ways kind of is in a similar place. And we hear from clients that, they'll have the first couple of weeks are amazing. They track out all their meals. It's awesome. Then something happens, right? Your kid's sick at home. You have work meetings run late. You're traveling, and you can't track to the best of your ability. But I think what's so important is it's not the difference of, can you be 80% consistent versus 100% perfect, right? You don't lose that much progress in that case, but you do gain a lot by being at 50% instead of 0, right? And we talk about this with clients all the time. Something is always better than nothing, right? So what we want to kind of talk about today in this approach is really, it's not this method that's going to just completely replace tracking calories entirely. It's just going to open up this much more flexible world that when life does get crazy, you have multiple methods to make sure that you truly are able to continue making progress, even if it's not perfect. And so what we have here is kind of we love using the best, better, good, and then the BAM at the bottom, the bare ass minimums. And I love this visual so much. Because in the past, again, if you are very much, I got to check the box, I need to do this as best as I can. If you're not at the top of that ladder, right, it's very easy to just jump straight off and say, screw it. And you might lie there, feeling in pain when you hit the ground, getting angry with yourself that you couldn't stay at the top of the ladder, or even blaming the ladder itself, right? Saying that the ladder was set up for me to fall. But the reality is, what if instead of looking at fitness as an on-off switch, right, or tracking as an on-off switch, we looked at it more as um, a lever, a dial that you can turn up, you can turn down, and you can move up and down whenever you needed. And even at the very, very worst days, you're still at your bare minimum, right? And we'll kind of describe what that could be, versus jumping completely off.
So how many of you, as you look back over the years with everything you've tried, maybe it was Insanity or P90X or cutting out carbs or whatever it is, how many of you have done, think back to the amount of plans you've done that had, it was either all in or all out. Like, how many of those approaches gave you the plan A, the plan B, the plan C, and that bottom line to fall back on, no matter how life is getting, like how crazy it's getting? Because it sounds so incredibly simple, but I think that's, the nature of this journey is that if we can have this sliding scale, the number one thing is just momentum and switching your brain from this constant I'm failing to this, oh, I'm being successful with something. If we can start to tweak that day in and day out, where you're looking back at your day and maybe it wasn't your best day plan, where you were going to get the workout in, get the 10,000 steps, eat perfectly for all 3 meals, get 9 hours of sleep, but maybe it's a step down from that. And you can look back and start to really retrain yourself to see what you're doing well and what you're doing differently and what you are doing instead of this hyper fixation on what you haven't been doing. Because this is where you can really tweak your mindset to just start recognizing more of that. Of course, we're all built to just recognize the negative. It's what keeps us alive. But if we can slowly start to sneak in recognizing the success we are having on these crazy days, it just changes your entire relationship to the process. So with this, that's exactly what we're doing with a flexible tracking method, is coming up with levels like this ladder so that you have a plan, whether you're at home in your routine, crushing it, working, you meal prepped all the things, or you're out of town, or you have a birthday party to go to, or, everything's going crazy at work and you didn't prep and you didn't even have groceries. So the problem with a lot of intuitive eating, quote unquote, approaches out there is that like there's no bearings if you try to jump straight to that. I'm sure you've seen it online, like, just mindfully eat, just focus on each bite, chew slowly. And that can be helpful. But if we try to just jump to that with nothing in between here and there, it's going to feel like you're dropped in the middle of nowhere with no compass and no idea, especially if you've spent a lot of time outsourcing hunger cues to an app or a meal plan. And so this sliding scale framework is going to allow you to kind of ease your way in, because this can be scary. Like I get it. And a lot of our clients come in that, that calorie app it's kind of that safety blanket, and that's totally okay. It's very helpful, but it can be scary to move away from that. And so if we have a scale to go to different levels between here and there, it can be a total game changer. So our goal is to take you from this, like, I have no idea what or how much I'm eating, to I'm starting to get just like what is enough and what that feels like for me. So it's going to bridge us from the tracking to intuitive eating over time. So where does this fit into your journey? If you are not familiar, this is our system that we use with our clients. So we have 3 pieces: shift, simplify, and sustain. Shift is about maximizing your metabolism. we're taking our foot off the brake, so to speak, because so many people, just like I said a little bit earlier, calories are all that matter, right? Like you just have to cut your calories. You just need a calorie deficit, and that's going to get you results. How many people have jumped like the first thing they do when they're going after a fat loss journey or a weight loss journey is just, all right, I'm going to eat less. Toss it in the chat if that sounds familiar. So if we jump to that, it's a journey to burnout. Like that's what it is. Because the only solution is to eat less as things slow down. So what we're doing with our shift phase is maximizing your calories out, building lean muscle, supporting you with more movement throughout the day, supporting you with meals that help you feel great, that support your energy levels, get you enough protein, and all these things. So we go from there. And then we, ironically, even though we're not like, hey, let's eat as little as possible, for people that have weight to lose, we do see a decent amount of weight loss in this phase, but it's just a totally different experience because we're focusing on calorie burn, not just how much we're eating. And all of a sudden, we're focusing on more of things, more protein, more fiber, more steps, more weight training, all these things that, once again, we're starting to flip our mindset towards more of things instead of less of things. And it's just a totally different experience. So, where this flex track formula fits into your journey is, of course, this depends on you. So, I am actually really curious from everybody that's here, where are you right now? Are you someone that has 100% had success with tracking food and you just didn't have the way to move away from it and you're curious about that? Or are you someone that hasn't even had success with tracking food and you're looking for an alternative method to get to your goal? So Lori says ready to track less. Carol says, I'm there, tracked forever, but now I know a bit about food and fullness. Tracking isn't getting results anymore. Jenny says, tracked on and off, hard to maintain. Diana says, looking for an alternative. Alternative. Dominic says, tons of success, not looking to not track. And we're going to get to that too, Dominic. Like, it is total, there's nothing wrong with tracking. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. Okay. So it sounds like a lot of people have had a lot of success in the past. They just didn't have a way to move away from it. So this method absolutely can be used before you get to your goal. For most people, what I would say is that it's going to be more realistic to incorporate along the way slowly and focus on this during the sustain part of your journey, which is where we are keeping our results and minimizing the cognitive effort required to keep them. But I'm not going to say that you can't do this before then, because we have been getting success with clients doing this beforehand. What I would say is that the closer, like if you have 0 to 5 pounds to lose before you get to your goal weight, or you have 0 to 10 pounds to lose, and you're a little bit more advanced with things, and it's just a finer line at that point, then, oh, can you guys not hear me? Lacey said,
I can hear you.
okay. Okay, cool. So, if you are closer to that goal, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, Herman, but what I would say is like, I would probably just make that final push with the tracking and then start to utilize these techniques. It's just that last 5 pounds. Like, that's a different story than if someone's coming in with 20, 30, 40, 50 pounds to lose. You absolutely can be seeing success with this method. Just realize that you might have to go back up the scale a little bit when you plateau later on.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the best analogies I've ever heard for fat loss, if you think about it like a tube of toothpaste, right? When you
Mhm.
first open it up and you start squeezing, it's like it just comes pouring out, right? It's so easy to get the toothpaste out of there. the closer and closer you get to the very, very bottom, the harder and harder you have to squeeze, right? Until eventually, like it's not even worth it, and you just toss it and get a new one, right? And fat loss is kind of similar to that, where at the very end, like the reality is, if you are saying, you know what, I've just got 10 pounds to lose, you do kind of have to make a choice of like, do I really want to hunker down and track calories, get very precise, because you're going to have a lot less wiggle room. That's just the reality of being leaner. Or you can make the choice of saying, you know what, I'm also totally fine taking the long route, right? And doing this over the next few years and slowly making progress in a more flexible way that doesn't necessarily make me sacrifice things in my lifestyle for the next 8 to 12 weeks. None of those are right, but it is something that I think at the end you certainly will have a lot less flexibility.
Love it. Yeah. Yeah, well said. I love that analogy. I hadn't heard that one. So yeah, so and this is where it's not like you have to decide today and you're like, this is what I'm doing. This entire scale is going to be flexible. So if you want to incorporate something without tracking before getting to your goal, the most important thing, and we're going to get into this, is that self-monitoring along the way to see if it's working, right? So intuitive eating, as we see it in the literature, is much more helpful on the grand scheme of things to maintain weight, not to lose weight. Now, like I said, we've had great success with people doing this. But if what I want to highlight is that, and it sounds like most of you here have had great success with tracking temporarily in the past. And so this isn't necessarily just like this magical way of getting results without any effort, right? Like yeah, I promise you, it is real that you can get away from tracking all your food and maintain results. But if we're here for like some, oh man, detox tea that allows you to intuitively eat and not track food. The big thing is like intuitive tracking and living in the middle and 80/20 actually requires more quote unquote discipline, if we want to use that word, or responsibility. Like it's way harder than the black and white that Herman was talking about earlier. Trust me, I wish there was a magic thing we could cut out and it was just a matter of, yeah, don't eat that and then you're healthy as can be. But that ties back to this check the box mentality that it's very attractive to our brains. Like we want that black and white. We want this good or bad so that we can stop thinking about this. And so I really want to hammer home that this, while it may sound like, oh, 80/20, like truly enjoying that 80/20 and being able to enjoy an ice cream cone with the kids or whatever it may be, long term is way harder because it takes mental energy and it's tough to sit in the middle and sit with that. So, it's ironic to me that a lot of the more extreme approaches kind of give off this vibe of, you just got to want it more and have better discipline when it's like, okay, well, I think that's more of an appeal to just our dare I say, like childlike nature of wanting to be told what's good and bad and not having to think for ourselves. So
Well,
none of these, go
bro,
ahead.
just real quick too. Like I think it's one of those things too that if you think about anything else in your life, right? Like think about any job that you've had where you were new. It's just the reality of learning a completely new skill too, right? Like when we want these hard, rigid, 100% rules, it's kind of a lack of confidence in what we're doing in the first place because we don't know what we're doing in the first place, right? And that's why would you if you're brand new to it, right? And so like any job that you've ever had, if you've done it for, 5 years, 10 years, whatever, think about like when you were first learning that. You were probably so worried about, every little minor detail that it's over time, after 10 years, you're like, that doesn't really matter. That doesn't really matter, right? Like you become so much more almost, again, like almost intuitive at your job because you understand the foundational rocks that truly matter and all the little details that just are not worth your mental energy. And this is exactly the same.
Great point. Yeah, they're there as, you're brand new. It's a great constraints or whatever they are, tracking, like hitting targets, it's just a starting point. It's not the end all be all. Like that's perfect. So as we go through this, I want to go over a few prerequisites that are going to make it way easier for this to realistically help you long term. Because there are some things, and we're not gonna, I mean, we don't want to make this 6 hours. So I'm gonna go over them quick because we could talk for hours about all this. But these are all the things that are going to be habits that make this way easier and more likely to be successful for you long term. So first and foremost, our shift phase, the body composition and metabolism support. So generally 2 to 4, like let's say 3 30-minute weight training sessions per week, bare minimum of 100 grams of protein per day, probably closer to that 0 0.7 grams per pound of body weight, 7,000 steps per day. Baseline of food quality for most of your meals. So a great proxy for food quality is fiber. So let's just say 25 grams of fiber. If you're getting that on the regular from whole food sources, not like a carb balanced tortilla that has 17 grams of God knows what in it that counts as fiber, actual like fruits, veggies, those types of things. Consistency tracking. And it sounds like most of you have been able to be consistent with tracking before. Like what I'd say here is if you can't be consistent with your calorie management while tracking your food at maintenance, what makes you think you can do it without that? So generally, it sounds like most of you have done that before. Daily walking, that 7K steps per day, but outdoor time as well is going to really help with our circadian rhythm, everything, really. Alternative coping skills or mindfulness around food, and whether it's breath work or a mindfulness practice or journaling or reading or anything like that we have in place to help us kind of down regulate without necessarily outsourcing that to food. Monitoring alcohol, sufficient water intake, values oriented goals. If we're really focused on getting into that bikini and that's it, and we're not focused on what's underneath that and what's important to us across our family or whatever it may be, it'll be a lot tougher. Environment optimization. So the biggest thing here, I would say for environment is what's available around your house. Do we have cookies and chips everywhere we turn? Or do we have some fruit available and out and inside and easy to grab? And then eating a decent amount of food at home. Now, of course, like these are not all required. These are things that are going to make you burn more calories in general. So then you have more wiggle room and flexibility to work with. They're going to make it much easier to make the choices in line with your goal. They're going to keep you much fuller. So all of these are just things to consider. And it sounds like most of you here have been on this journey and you're not brand new to this and you're ready to move away from that tracking. So real quick, self-monitoring. Research shows us that those who self-monitor in some way, shape, or form are much more likely to maintain weight loss long term. It allows us to find the middle. Like if we have no feedback on if this is working through the scale or hunger cues or gym performance or body measurements, it's very hard to make changes to our strategies, right? Like pretty obvious. We need feedback on if we're successfully maintaining what we want to maintain while we go through this process. So please, please, please do not try to navigate this without monitoring body weight. And if we really take our time so that you are not constantly jumping back to full tracking, it's going to really make this a lot smoother of a process. So we have a question. What do you mean by tracking consistency? Okay. Yeah, great question. So I mean the ability to track your food at me. I don't mean like at 1,200 calories, but it kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier. Like you have some experience here with tracking, and we're going to go through if you don't here at the end, if you don't have that experience, where to start. But generally, if you're able to build a consistent week of tracking your food, it's going to be very helpful for you to move away from it. But we're going to build that in. So, yeah, Herman, anything to add there?
It'll probably be clear once we start going through the system.
Good point. Yeah. Cool. So gotta throw a shout out to a client here working with Coach Natalie right now, who's coming up on 50 pounds lost. and she hasn't tracked her food in since December. And it's not like she's running a marathon every day or anything like that. She's doing 3 home workouts per week. She's getting a step target in, and she's been utilizing these things along her journey. And I want to point this out that like what we were saying earlier, that if you have a lot more weight to lose, it's much more likely that you're able to achieve this. And now that she's closer to that goal, it may mean that she may slide down the scale a little bit more to get a little more precise, to get that last 5 or 10 versus the first 5 or 10. So just had to give her a shout out. So I will pass it along to you, Herman.
Yeah, so let's dive into what we're actually talking about, right? Like tactically, what does this all mean? How do we physically do it? What is tracking? How do you do it intuitively and flexibly? All these words that we're throwing out there, right? Um, so what we kind of did, and one, what I want to point out too with the results above, the really, really important thing is like everybody will look and say, down 45 pounds, 0 days tracked since December. Oh my God, that's incredible, right? But what's really important in there to lay out is what happened in November, right? What happened in the first 2 weeks of December. That tracking short term of being a little bit more rigid, being a little bit more strict. And that is what unlocked the ability to do this long term without tracking. And I think that's a really, really important piece because as we go into the system, um, this is going to serve as it's not a concrete roadmap. It's not a you start here and then you move to this, then you move to this, and then you just kind of progress, and every step of the way is just a full linear progression. It's going to be a series of skills, and what we kind of did was we outlined, what we believe is kind of like the natural progression for most people, but know this that it's going to be a series of kind of skill sets that you might jump back and forth and you might use them at the same time. And there is no right or wrong way to use it. It's serving as kind of like a menu of options for you to have multiple skill sets that you can rely on in different times of your life. So as we get down to the method, I'd love to hear, I'm going to ask you guys to put this in the chat. So give me what is one of your favorite like cooking competition shows? Throw it in the chat. Which one do you watch all the time? I know mine, Top Chef. Okay. Great one. I'm in Wisconsin, so we just watched the one that was in Wisconsin last year. That was awesome. Beat Bobby Flay, nice, chopped. Great British Bake Off. I got that one. Is it cake? Yes. That's awesome. I love that one. Okay. Awesome. So I personally love MasterChef, but all of those are great shows. And I think what's so important with those shows is you watch them, right? And they have these crazy challenges where they're given a picnic basket full of like, you know, a deer head and a piece of broccoli, and they're like, make a 5 course meal out of this. And you're like, how did they just possibly come together with all these things? And they're not even using any measuring cups or anything like that. They're just eyeballing everything. And then they make these beautiful dishes, right? And serve them to the judges. And you look at that and you're like, that's crazy, right? But and everybody else knows that if you're just starting to cook, there's no way you're going to do that, right? You're going to be using a recipe. You're going to be following very closely. You're going to be using measuring cups and measuring spoons, and you're going to be trying to follow the directions as closely as you can, and hoping that you don't burn the chicken breast because you're cooking it on the highest heat without any oil, right? That's the reality of starting to cook. And all those chefs that are on MasterChef all did that too. That's how they all got started at some point in their life. And so as we walk through this, it is very similar to that piece where if you look at the right portion of this flex track method, the full macro tracking, that's kind of getting started, where you're following the recipe to a T, using measuring cups, measuring spoons. You're not going to just be throwing spices into random dishes and hoping that it all works together, because you're kind of learning how things go together, right? You're learning what foods are protein. You're learning what foods have high fiber. You're learning what foods go together that keep you hungry and which foods keep you full. And as we move to the left and go all the way to intuitive eating is essentially kind of that master chef version where you're able to do all of this without really looking at what the ingredients are, without really looking at how many calories or protein or all that is within your food, because you already kind of know it for the most part, because you've done some of these other things more extensively. So before we kind of dive into just a little bit of each one, I think it's really important to note that like none of these are inherently better or worse than each other. They all have trade-offs. They all have different uses, and they all have different times where they're going to be the best option for you. So I think it's important to note again, you're likely going to start on the right and go to the left. It's just not realistic that you're going to jump straight into intuitive eating without any experience. And I think that's where you hear this all online a lot of tracking calories versus intuitive eating, right? Intuitive eating in today's world that is filled with Oreos and Doritos and Twinkies is not a great strategy on its own, right? It's something that we want to get to for sure, but having these other skill sets make it much easier to actually get there.
And one thing to note on top of that too is how much, as we go through this, I want you guys to realize how much and how incredible our brains are at learning when we don't even consciously realize it. So while Herman says that, like, yeah, it's probably not realistic if you have no idea what protein is or what like decent portion sizes are of protein or whatever it may be, it's probably not realistic to jump straight all the way to the left side of this. If you've been tracking your food and utilizing that, yes, we can end up in this place where we're kind of outsourcing hunger and not really connecting. But at the same time, simply tracking takes you so far in realizing the quality of certain foods and all these things. So there's probably, if you're sitting here and you're like, man, I've been tracking for 5, 10, 15 years, you probably are going to move along the spectrum a lot faster because of that time you've put in during that full macro tracking. And what I will say quick too is that honestly, most of the time we aren't utilizing full tracking for full macro tracking for clients. And there are some specific reasons we might. If you're having specific problems with any autoimmunity or you need to do an elimination diet because of poor reactions to foods, things like that. Some of those like very, very low percentage people that have specific symptoms and things going on that make that necessary, we might be doing that. But generally, our first step here is just tracking smarter and not making it as hard as like just making it as easy as it can be. I talked to a lot of people that, and I was there for a long time where it was the obsession over, spreading that tracking across 6 meals across the day. I need 15 grams of fat and I need 35 grams of carbs and I need 35 grams of protein at each one of those single meals. And if you are familiar with what we do here at all, we're all about the 80-20. How can we get 80% of the results or more with 20% of the effort? And in this case, if we control for calories, protein, and fiber, and allow carbs and fats to fluctuate without going too low in either direction, we are going to get, honestly, it's not even 80% of the results. I would probably say 97% of the results. Herman, let me know if you disagree there. But
Completely agreed.
okay. So first things first here, let's stop playing macro Tetris and let's start focusing on the overall proportion in the day. Calorie target, protein target, probably a fiber target as well. 25 grams for women, 35 for men, and allowing those carbs and fats to fats to fluctuate a little bit. From there, if you want to go with 3 meals, I mean, I generally recommend 3 meals to most of my clients. If you want to go with 4 meals, whatever it may be, just getting those totals and doing this is going to be a game changer for you if you're used to playing macro Tetris every night. And then from there, please drop them in the chat. This isn't going to be a how to track your food masterclass. So, and I think we have a great podcast on some food tracking tips, but just the small stuff, pre-tracking, bulk tracking, copy and pasting your go-to meals, utilizing the recipes feature in whatever app you're using. If you have some go-to super easy things that help you with tracking, if you're someone that's pretty seasoned with that, please drop them in the chat. We're not going to go super deep on that, but baseline here is just going to be making it easier, making it so much easier and forgetting. And even I know this is tough because we're all conditioned to think that higher carb can lead to more things. If we are controlling for the calorie number, there is going to be virtually no difference. So from there, our natural progression is going to be structured meal rotations. And this does not have to be a this or that. So what we're going to do is after you've had some experience with this, you are going to just be finding realistically, how many meals do you think you eat in a given week over time? Like all of us think this has to be this huge overhaul. But in reality, I'm sure most of you are eating the same 5 to 10 meals on repeat all the time. So Dominic says, I eat the same thing Monday through Friday. Lori, yes, I'll be sharing this document. So don't worry about taking any notes. Cindy says, I tend to eat the same breakfast and lunch. Makes life easier. Yeah, let's make it easy. Let's make it routine. And then as we're tracking, we find this structured go-to rotation of 3 to 5 options for breakfast, 3 to 5 options for lunch, 3 to 5 options for dinner. And then all of a sudden, this becomes a lot less daunting to be just going to those because once again, you're going to be learning and you're going to just memorize like, oh, I have this many ounces of rice or whatever it is. But once again, you can be still copy and pasting those meals and keeping a rough outline in your tracking journal if you'd like. So you'll have access to this, but we included all of our go-to meals. Herman, Jess, and Coach Jess and myself, and the ones we go to. And seriously, these are not going to be gourmet. I'm scrolling too much. I always do that. These are not going to be gourmet meals. These are seriously like one of my favorites is seasoned Atlantic wild caught salmon from Costco and throwing it in the air fryer or the oven and utilizing some rice and some frozen veggies and throwing them in the air fryer. So you'll have access to this, but literally finding those 3 to 5 go-to rotations and just going to them over and over and over is going to allow you. So let's just go back up real quick. So we've started here and then we established these. And of course, when you get sick of it, you just swap one in. So maybe you're going to these go-tos most days and then 2 nights a week, you try a different meal. And then, and I see Dominic commented, but what about the weekend? So this is where let's zoom out here and realize that if we have that meal rotation for your better or best days, you're going to these over and over. That right there is getting us 80-90% of our days. And then of course, yeah, life is going to happen. And this is where sliding left and right along this scale, depending what's going on, is going to be so helpful for you to rely on those bare minimums or the good days so that you have practice along the way while most of the time you're hanging out here. But all of a sudden the weekend comes up, you didn't plan as well. All right, I'm going to start practicing these next steps that we're about to go over so that it's not this linear thing. You're getting exposure to each level of the system. And the great part is you're self-monitoring and weighing along the way and seeing that feedback along how you're doing. Yeah. Herman, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah. So then kind of going down, or I guess going left on the scale, but another piece, and I think what I want to highlight too, with all of these kind of not kind of like traditional weighing and measuring food tracking, so structured meals, hand portions, we'll talk about power plates. What you're essentially seeing is if we are not weighing and measuring our food, then there needs to be another way for us to manage calories predictably, right? Ultimately. And so what this is doing is it's creating structure in a way. And so that's not good or bad. The reality is, though, it's if you are a person who travels a ton, eats out a lot, has really different meal times, really different types of food all the time, lots of like bulk meals like lasagnas and soups and things like that. It's very hard to predict your calories without weighing and measuring, right? That's just the reality of it. And so creating more of a structure around I'm going to eat at very similar times. I'm going to eat similar portions of different types of food. Um, is a way for you to kind of move away from tracking, but it does kind of have to be one or the other to get some kind of predictability, right? So knowing which one you also kind of prefer yourself, like I have clients who, even after they've gotten results, they genuinely just enjoy tracking more. They like weighing and measuring their food. It gives them predictability. They feel in control. Me personally, I am the opposite. I would much rather have a formula that I eat most 90% of meals, and I don't like having to track my food physically on a scale. And that's totally okay. I think it's I what I've known and realized with all my years of coaching now is that people are just very different in their preferences and how they work best, and that's completely fine. So if you're like me, one thing that I like to utilize a lot is hand portions and power plates. And this is again kind of sliding left on the scale. But so hand portions, the whole idea behind this, and I think I want to say Precision Nutrition was really the first one to kind of make this a really a big strategy that they use with clients. But if we look at literally using your hands, right? So that's consistent with your size of your body. So it's roughly a great estimate based on what would be the best portion sizes for you. It's not perfect, and certainly it's not going to be as 100% accurate as weighing and measuring your food. But the studies have shown that using this method is reduces the variability of what your calories and your macro guesstimates are by 90%. So still a very accurate method overall. And all this is simply saying is if we look at our hand sizes, right? So one palm is going to be about 20 to 30 grams of protein. Carbs we measure in like a cupped hand size. Veggies we use our fists. And then fats we're going to use one thumb. And these are all rough estimates. They're not perfect by any means. And so what I think is great for a client to do is when you're in that beginning stage of tracking and weighing and measuring, is to also start noticing, right? Start seeing, okay, when I get 30 grams of protein on my plate, how does that compare to my palm size? Right? Is that one palm? Is that two palms? Um, and what if you do eat pretty similar meals most of the week, you're going to start noticing patterns, right? And you're going to start being able to say, okay, typically it's like two palms of protein, it's like one cupped hand of carbs, and it's like one fist size serving of veggies, right? Or whatever it is for you and your goals, so that number one, if you move to this long term and kind of use this as your compass, or let's say you're traveling, right? And you're at your family's house, and you don't want to bring your food scale because you don't want to bring it out for a birthday party. You can go to hand portions, right? And just understand that, okay, whatever we're eating that day, I'm going to use these rough estimates and put them on my plate. And I know I'll be pretty close to what I need to be. Going down then, so as we talk about kind of like again, formulaic, right? Having a structure. And if you don't know exactly how many hand portions and things like that I should get on my plate, a great formula for most people is what we call the power plate. And this is a very, very simplistic approach to it. But essentially, we're looking and saying, hey, let's get half of our plate full of non-starchy vegetables. So that's going to be about 1 to 2 fist-size servings for most people, maybe up to 3. Let's get a quarter of that plate full of lean protein, right? So about 1 to 2 palm-sized portions, and then a quarter of that plate of a fiber-rich carb. Again, 1 to 2 cupped hand portions. And we won't go into the full details of this one, but we did build out, there's an attachment of the power plate method. Brooks, you want to open that quick? So just because if you're looking at saying like, what's a fiber-rich carb, right? So in this separate guide, on top of this other guide, we have a full list of kind of food options that would fall into each category. And then also at the bottom, what you should do to adjust the portions based on your goal. So if you want to lose weight, if you want to build muscle, how would you change these different hand portions, and just general tips. So check that out if you're interested in this method, and feel like this would be a good fit for you as well. Okay, and then the last one, all the way to the left. So intuitive eating. And again, like we kind of talked about, right? This is the North Star. This is like I put in here at the end, I think it's at the bottom of this. Yeah, so like reaching this point is like you are the equivalent of a black belt in martial arts, right? It comes from all the practice you put in of tracking your macros, tracking your calories, using hand portions, learning how to build power plates. With that, you start learning to intuitively understand, much more around, am I actually full? Am I actually hungry? Which combo of these carbs and proteins and fats keep me full for a long time and keep me energized and don't make me feel like I'm crashing in the afternoon, right? A lot of that's going to come with time, but this is kind of, again, it's moving to this form where you can intuitively do this as if like you're just running on autopilot and this is just how you eat, right? But again, this takes time. And I think that's so important to highlight that this is not the starting point. This is kind of the long term where we want to be. And it's funny because ironically, the more we track, the more structured we are, the easier it becomes to make progress without tracking. And this is kind of the place where we end up after all the time spent learning all those other skills.
Yeah, and I'll just throw, I was gonna say that to Herman, like we're gonna give you some tips and tricks here for intuitive eating, but like back to what I said earlier about you're just learning this entire process without even consciously realizing it. So as we start, like as you're seeing these things, you're basically if you're more of a beginner on this journey, you're basically planting the seed of like, oh, these are some things to start paying attention to no matter where I am. Because it's not like you do this once you get to your goal. These are things you can start to play with and pay attention to and mix in along the way your entire journey so that it's just sparking that unconscious awareness or conscious awareness at the same time of just slowly but surely like, oh, okay, I can try that out a little bit.
And so, a couple of just, considerations. And again, I think if we're talking about intuitive eating, like this is a whole separate skill set that you could do a whole nother workshop, the same way Brooks talked about how we could do a whole nother workshop on actually tracking your food. But just real general kind of things I think everybody could benefit from really being aware of. So number one, I mean, when we talk about intuitive eating, like me and Brooks are really, and DataFit in general, like we're really kind of focused on just the idea of mindful eating in general. And so a couple of the things is starting to learn, am I actually hungry when I'm eating food, right? Am I bored when I'm getting a craving? Am I stressed, right? Like what are some of the emotions that pop up that might be leading to snacking that we don't actually want? which again is sometimes when we're so focused on checking the box, and so many times, like I'll hear clients, especially in the beginning, talk about, oh, like I just feel so full because I was trying to hit my calories or I was trying to hit my protein. When in reality, it's, well, in that moment, do we need to eat? Right? Like just because we're trying to hit a number specifically versus our body is often very good at telling us that we're good for now. It's just sometimes we are not the greatest at being able to actually hear it. And so a really, really great method, and I can't remember, it was on a podcast. I can't remember who it is now, so I hate to take credit for it because it is not me, but I love these three questions that if you are somebody who, you feel you get cravings a lot, especially like people talk about having sweet cravings at night, right? Or things like chips, crispy snacks, whatever it is that is, your kryptonite. For me, I would say it's certainly the chips and salsa category. Um, or post dinner reaching into the pantry and just seeing what kind of sweet treat is in there. A great way to just stop is to, if you go to the pantry and if you really want to, take this seriously and try it out, you can even put a post-it note that just says what, why, what else. And it's just a quick reminder to stop and say, what am I doing? Right? Oh, I'm reaching into the pantry. Why am I doing it? And that's a really, really important question, right? Why am I doing it? I'm hungry, or I'm bored, or I don't know why I'm doing this. It's just like a habit, I think, right? And then what else could I be doing? And that the answer to that question might be I could probably go for a walk. I could probably drink some water. I actually need to go fold the laundry. Or I should probably go work on that thing that I've been avoiding because it's causing me stress and making me try and distract myself with snacking, right? Or it could be nothing. I kind of just want to eat this cookie real quick, right? Like that's just actually what I really, really want right now. And there is no right or wrong answer. It's just, again, it's creating a little bit of space and a little bit of barrier and actually being aware of what choice you're making. The second piece of this is the meal hygiene. These are the things that, you hear these all the time and they are very important. So slowing down when you're eating, chewing more, right? Trying to actually enjoy your meal, putting your screen away. There's a study that showed that when people eat while scrolling or looking at screens, they eat on average 500 calories more per day, which is an incredible stat. Um, Eating your protein and your veggies first. If you tend to scarf down everything else, and then you can't finish those things that are the most important for your goals, right? What I will say about meal hygiene and this whole piece right now, these are important factors and they can be helpful. Do not go crazy with them because the reality is, and I think Jordan Syatt has talked about this, and I completely agree that when you are a person who just genuinely enjoys eating fast, like that's just how you naturally eat, trying to slow down is the most painful thing in the world, right? And it makes the whole meal almost unenjoyable. And the same way would be true the opposite way. If you're like a very, very slow eater and someone forced you to just speed up how you eat, you'd be so uncomfortable, right? So while some of this I do think is important to try out, it's not something that if you're like, oh my God, I eat my food really fast, it's just you have to change your entire way that you naturally eat either. So just I think that's a fair warning there.
And then I already covered this, but this is planting the seed for, I think this is important to, when earlier on a couple people said, what about the weekend, right? And so if we really break that down, right? These, like we can call it audible meals, just because you may not be ready for this left side of the spectrum right away doesn't mean we can't plant the seed about hand portions, power plates, intuitive eating. And then, all right, let's back up a little bit because it's not like the weekend is just a black hole that you enter and then you come out like with absolutely no bearings. Some of you with kids are probably like, yeah, just wait. But anyway, so if we really think about the percentage of those meals, so we always need to be comparing where we're at now and the changes we're making. So even if we didn't touch the weekend and we just went from Sunday evening to Friday at noon and started utilizing meal rotations, all right, boom. You just maybe you didn't make extra progress, but you just made your life a lot easier because you're not tracking. Or you're able to move away from tracking pretty quickly, utilizing meal rotations Sunday evening through Friday at noon. But let's break that down even further. What is going on Saturday morning? What is going on Saturday night? Usually it's that result of more of that all or nothing swing where it's like, we got pizza with the kids last night. Like, let's go to Krispy Kreme this morning type of a thing where it's like, can we utilize an audible meal of paying attention to hand portions or power plates or intuitive eating Friday night and Saturday night and use a meal rotation for Saturday morning, Saturday at noon for lunch, and Sunday morning? Just building in these small tweaks of having these backups to be able to not jump straight back into that all or nothing can be so powerful. So that's why paying attention to these early on, even if you're tracking every little thing, is going to be so helpful for you when you inevitably end up in a situation where you don't have the app or the scale on you. So just want to talk about adjustments real quick, and we're going to give a sample of basically the journey from beginner to advanced here in a second, and like a checklist you can use to make this. So essentially, as we've mentioned already, this is not a this, then that. It's a sliding scale. So let's say, as I asked you guys earlier, a lot of you said, I've had success with tracking in the past. So if you're looking at this from the point of view of getting to your goal with tracking and then moving away, essentially how we would look at this is first and foremost, bring calories up to maintenance to maximize your flexibility and energy while maintaining your movement, your strength training, all those things. From there, establish the maximum amount of maintenance calories for you for 2 to 4 weeks with tracking consistency. This is what we do with our clients once they get to their goal. Like, you've probably seen the buzzword of a reverse diet online. Essentially, like that. This allows us to maximize where your calories are at. Then from there, all right, we have maintained our target weight for 2 to 4 weeks. We have maintained that with calorie tracking. Let's build in those rotational meals. And honestly, at this point, all you're going to be doing is tweaking the portions on your rotational meals because you've already had those in place throughout the journey. Then we are going to start slowly utilizing the power plates, hand portions, intuitive eating for meals, days you do not use your rotational meals, just like we just talked about with the weekends. And then we're going to continue monitoring average body weight across 2 week intervals. So this is one of the most important pieces because if we just stop, we have no feedback. And as time goes on, we're able to slowly but surely move to more of those strategies on the left side of the scale while maintaining. Now, if you are someone with more weight to lose and you want to utilize this earlier on in your journey in the shift and simplify phase, essentially what we would do is just slide back up the scale when we hit a plateau. So utilizing the simplified tracking at a deficit, then move to those rotational meals, and then you're still weighing in. We hit a plateau. All you're doing is just sliding back up, adjusting calories down, maybe 10%, and rinse and repeat. So I think this will be a lot easier for us to just walk through a checklist for you to be able to see it directly instead of me just talking about it.
Yeah. So real quick, we've covered a lot, right? It's honestly incredible how much is in here. Can I get one brave person to be like, give me like just like a breathe emoji? That's just like, okay, I'm a little bit overwhelmed to be thinking about all these things I could do, should be doing. How am I going to do all this, right? Anyone? Everyone feels great. Maybe we just covered it like super. There we go. There. Yep. Okay. Which is again, and I think as we go through all this, right? I think this is kind of like painting the point that we made in the beginning, and painting this picture that we, regardless of how many times we say, "Hey, you don't have to do all of this at once. It's gonna take time. You don't have to be perfect." We still do this to ourselves, right? We still paint ourselves into these boxes where we are mad that we're not at level 3, even if we're in the middle of level 1. And so what I want to do is, make sure that it's super clear that there is no timeline. There is no right amount of time or how long this should take to get from shift to simplify to sustain. And it's also never going to be linear. Sometimes you'll move from one to the other. Sometimes you'll move back. Sometimes it'll depend on the season of life that you're in. And again, as long as you are learning along the way and making progress, then that's really all that matters in the long run. And so hopefully this kind of beginner to advanced checklist, and again, this isn't meant to be if I don't do everything in level 1, I can't even move on to level 2 by any means. It's just that with our clients, we've seen that once you are able to move from level 1 and kind of get most of these consistently done, right? And I should say, whenever we say consistent, we really are referring to like 80% of the time. Because the reality is no one's perfect 100% of the time, nor do you need to be to see results. And once you are doing most of these things 80% of the time, then you're probably going to be much more likely to have success in the next stage. And that's how I would use this thing. So level 1 really kind of being the beginning part of your journey of there's two pieces to this. Number 1, it's going to maximize your metabolic rate. But 2, it's going to establish the essential healthy habits that if you're doing these things, not only is it much easier to enter a fat loss phase, but it's also the things that just generally keep you healthy in the long run, right? So even if you didn't want to lose body fat or change your weight or anything like that, if you just did this level 1, you would be a very fit and healthy person for a very long time. And so that's why we kind of start there, is because it's not just about weight loss, right? It's not just about changing your body. It's about making sure that you actually feel healthy, that you actually feel fit, and that you can sustain it for a very long time. And so if you see like the kind of like the most important things we outline in there, walking every day. So 7,000 steps per day. If you're walking 3,000 right now, you're not going to get to 7,000 tomorrow. That's the reality, right? But can you get to 4,000? Can you get to 5,000? Right? Can you slowly build up over time? The same way, when we look at strength training, 3 times a week for 30 minutes is fantastic. And also, it's going to be enough for the vast majority of people to get in incredible shape. You really don't need that much more. Certainly, if we do a little bit more than that, 4 times a week, will you get faster progress? Maybe. And for some people, they'll eventually get to that place. But I even think for 90% of people, even strength training twice a week would be life-changing if you're doing it consistently. Tracking and getting at least 0.7 grams of protein per pound of weight. Tracking fiber, getting at least 25 grams. And then with all this, again, going back and tracking calories in general are kind of like the foundational habits that if you're doing these things on the list, all those other things like Brooks mentioned, like the detox teas, right? Whatever crazy stuff you hear online is all a bunch of noise. Because if we can nail these down, we're really taking care of the 90% of the stuff that actually matters. So if you go down to the simplify phase, this is where you're looking and saying, okay, I've got these basic ones down. I'm doing them most of the time. I have strategies in place that even if I don't get my steps in one day, I get them the next day, right? So again, you're consistently on most days getting most of these done, right? Then we're moving to a place where now all we're doing is we're just adjusting your calorie target. based on what your goal is. So if we want to reduce body fat, we're going to lower your calories. If we want to go into a muscle building phase, we're actually going to do the opposite. We're going to raise your calories. And within here, I mean, really, it's called simplified because it really is
Right,
that
to turn off
simple,
my stupid camera.
right? Because we have, at that point, we have really already established the bulk of the habits that we need to make this phase feel simple. Now in here too, you know, we would be, and this probably gets a little bit more technical of like when we're working with clients, but I guess if you're doing it on your own too, you know, we talk about weight plateaus, adjusting calories. If you aren't seeing movement on the scale, typically what we would say is, you know, generally speaking, I would aim for a 15 to 20% calorie deficit as you're getting started. And that should lead to about a pound, half a pound, maybe a little bit more per week of weight loss. And if you're not seeing that after about 4 weeks, you might make an adjustment. But I would not do that after 3 days or 4 days, or even 1 or 2 weeks. I would give yourself at least 3 to 4 weeks at these calories before making an adjustment. And of course, a coach, you know, for all the clients here, this is obviously something we work on a lot together. But then also, you know, it's starting to, I think the important piece here at the end, Brooks, if you scroll down a little bit, is starting to learn, you know, portion sizes, monitoring biofeedback, starting to introduce some of these other techniques like hand portions, power plates, starting to think about mindful eating a little bit more, right? Because ultimately our goal is to get to level 3. And that's where we feel like we're at a healthy weight. We feel like we can focus on just really trying to make sure that we maintain the results, which a data fit is, I mean, it's ultimately like our biggest goal is that everybody talks about losing weight. We care about you keeping it off because that is so much more important. And the vast majority of people gain all the weight back within 2 years, right? So the really, really important piece is that level 1 sets you up for level 3, right? We're going to continue doing all those things. We're just going to bring calories back to a maintenance level. And we're going to try to maximize them as much as we can. We're going to find your rotational meals that you can go to on a regular basis. And in this place, you know, I think what's important is there's always going to be a level of self-monitoring. Like Brooke said, the vast majority of people who are successful with keeping weight off, they still have some form of self-monitoring. That might mean tracking. I have clients who have already lost all the weight they want to, and they've been maintaining for years now, and they still track every day because they genuinely makes them feel better and more in control, and it's just easier for them to live that way. I have other clients who want to get out of that as fast as they can and move to a more intuitive approach. And in that place, I would still probably recommend, you know, weighing yourself a couple of times a week, just so you can start seeing, okay, it's not that if I gain 1 pound, but I would kind of look at maintenance as a range, right? So for me, I'm typically between 185 to 190, maybe up to like 195 on the upper end, throughout the different times of year. During the holidays, I probably get closer to that upper side. And then during like this time now, I'm probably a little bit on the lower side because there's less things going on in general. But when you start kind of creeping up to that upper part of the maintenance, right, for whatever that is for you, you know, okay, maybe I need to start instilling some of these habits back in. Maybe I need to start tracking a little bit. Maybe I need to go back to focusing on the power plates, things like that. And so again, having some level of self-monitoring is still important in the long run, but this whole level, really the point is to help you live your life, right? And to make sure that you find the right balance of structure in doing these habits without driving yourself crazy. Because at the end of the day, your physical health is important and so is your mental health. And that chart that Brooke showed in the beginning, like when you're at your peak is when you kind of have that middle ground between both, right? And that's ultimately what makes you successful in the sustain phase. And that's so important because everything we're saying, like, it sounds so simple, But this all comes from all that work that you did in level one and level two, right?
Real quick, a couple mindset considerations. And I think we've kind of touched on all these already, but essentially, this is where it's so useful to be self-monitoring because on the left here, like these X's are, let's say the green is days you're tracking in your app. And these red days are the days that you're utilizing intuitive eating or power plates or hand portions. If you're able to be weighing in 3 times a week and you're seeing yourself go from this month I did 24 days tracking and next month I did 18, this is where self-monitoring can be so important to be changing the outcome from not like, oh, am I losing weight to am I maintaining weight while decreasing the amount of tracking I'm doing? So I just wanted to show this visual to show you that progress can be made in ways other than the scale. Crazy idea, right? If we're able to decrease that and move to more audible meals more often and keep monitoring that body weight, that's going to be really powerful. And then the cool part is, since it's a sliding scale, if the weight's coming up a little bit, then it's like, all right, maybe I'm just going to take one step back and continue on that tracking journey a few more days of the week to make sure that I'm doing this slowly but surely. Like Herman said, there is no rush. There's no rush at all. And then another consideration we've already highlighted as well is like maybe you got a lot going on right now. It's okay to track. There's nothing wrong with tracking long term. And Herman already touched on this, but making sure essentially this four burners theory is about we aren't turning things on or off. We're just it's like a dimmer switch or it's like a simmer on the stove. So if we have these tools, and maybe that is moving towards more intuitive eating when things are crazy with work and social life and then being able to turn it back up, it just goes back to that sliding scale. Um, so one thing I want to highlight next to that is this ladder is what we do for clients across. It's not just the way you're monitoring food. This is something you can apply to my step goal, my weight training, my, personal or professional development. And essentially what we do with clients is build that out across all areas of their life to move away from that all or nothing mindset. And so utilizing this as a way to think through how you adjust up and down depending on what's going on with any area of your life is huge. So and I know we're already coming up on 90 minutes. Herman and I are talkers, I guess. So I'm just curious. Please drop in the chat. I mean, how are you feeling? Is this showing you a route away and a route out of the tracking you've had in the past? Has this shown you at least what it can look like? What are some of your biggest takeaways you can go to right away to be able to start utilizing this maybe on the weekend when you're not able to be tracking? I mean, for me, like Herman mentioned, he loves the hand portions. To me, I'm not a big fan of that. Like I'm going to go more towards the power plates and intuitive eating than I am going to do a hand portion approach. And I'm usually most of the time doing my meal rotations. So it doesn't have to be linear for you. So from there, I'm going to stop blabbering here and let's get into questions on what we went over today. Okay, so Diana said, can you go over the power plate again? Yes.
Yeah, so the power plate, and there is there's a whole nother guide that goes way more detail that's attached in here. So you guys will get this after, and you can read through that guide if you'd like. But essentially, the whole idea here is if you're following this formula, for the vast majority of people, you're going to be hitting pretty balanced macro meals, meaning you're going to get enough protein, enough fiber, and carbs and fats. We talked about in the beginning, but for the vast majority of people, surprisingly, compared to what you probably hear online all the time, generally don't matter how much you have of one or the other in terms of how they impact your overall goals. It is much more driven by personal preference and what you like to eat more. So for this, it's really you're kind of getting pretty equal macronutrients across the board. And so really it's like in the simplest way to think about it. And this is how I and me and my wife literally build our meals like every single day for 90% of meals is we literally start by saying, what is the protein? And it's like, okay, it might be a chicken breast, might be, some steak, might be some pork loin, might be some salmon, whatever it is, right? And we're going to have a quarter plate, roughly about 1 to 2 palm-sized portions. Then we're going to say, what is the carb, right? And that might be rice, that might be potatoes, could be some fruit in the morning. It might be a waffle in the morning if we're feeling up for it, like whatever it is, and you're going to have about 1 to 2 cupped hand portions of that. And then the last piece is what is the veggie? And that might be, a side salad, which for us is like 50% of the time because it's just super easy to get bagged lettuce and just put in some cucumbers and tomatoes. It might be asparagus, it might be broccoli, right? There's not really one right or wrong answer for which one you have, but we literally kind of build out each meal using that formula because one, like I said, I don't personally like to track my calories and my macros throughout every day. And two, it just makes it so unbelievably easy for meal prepping and grocery shopping because we also shop within those categories. Like, what are the proteins we're buying? What are the carb sources we're buying? And what are the veggies we're buying? And then you just kind of plug and play with every plate. So that's again, this is one method and one formula that I know I personally use a ton. Great question.
So Gina said, how many weeks should you wait to adjust if scale is creeping up? Great question. Okay. So first and foremost, I think a good thing to point out here is towards the end of your weight loss, that number that's on the scale, when you get to that number and you've still been in a deficit recently, is not necessarily what your maintenance would be. So, first and foremost, if you've lost 15 pounds, expect the scale to come up. I don't know, Herman, what would you say? Maybe 2 to 5 pounds from there, just from glycogen storage in your muscles, from water weight, from digestion, just because you're no longer tracking or, I'm sorry, restricting.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, two
Cool.
to 5 pounds, I would say, is a very easy day-to-day fluctuation. And that's, I think that's when we're talking about fluctuations. There's so many things that could cause water fluctuation. At the end of the day, we are 60% water. And so 2 to 5 pounds on average is very normal for your weight to go up or down on a day-to-day basis. That has nothing to do with fat gain or fat loss. Could be because you ate more carbs that day, could be because you had more salt, could be because you just started a new workout, could be because you're stressed. And some of those things are, like stress, obviously we don't want a ton of. But just because you started eating more carbs and that caused water retention, that's not a bad thing. That's just something that comes with it. So to that degree, and Brooks, this is probably where you're going, is we would always recommend looking at your weight first off as an average over 7 days minimal. So you would look and say, okay, my average weight for this week was, making it up 135. And then if you go in on Sunday and you have a huge Italian dinner and the next day your weight is 137, your weight did not go up yet. And if you weigh 137 the next week, if you average all 7 days, okay, that might be an increase. But again, what like I brought up during the adjustments piece, you'd want to wait at least, in my opinion, 4 weeks, maybe 3 weeks of consistently looking and saying, is my weight actually up versus where it was a month ago on average, um, or am I pretty much just right where I was throughout the month when I just look at the average weight?
Yeah, and this also goes back to that conversation of there's no reason to rush at the same time, right? Because the main concern would be if we get it a little, we want to avoid getting in that swing back and forth between, okay, I'm going to intuitive eating now, and then I gained 5 pounds in a month. I'm going to just track and cut 5 pounds this month. Like we want to avoid that just swing back and forth all or nothing again. So, I would err on the, if we look at, depending how old you are, if you've got 30 years left, or maybe it's less, maybe it's more, who knows? I would, if you're at your target and you're like, hey, this is somewhere I'm okay maintaining this for the rest of my life. Like I'm comfortable here. It's healthy for me. I would just say err on the side of being more cautious than not. Like there's no rush to jump way away from what you're doing now. Take it slow. Maybe it is just one day a week where you're working on your intuitive eating or your power plate skills. And then you reassess after a month. Like there's nothing wrong with going slower just to avoid kind of like reworking the entire process every other month. Any other questions here? I got a couple texts sent out with our new offer we're trying, or our new coaching offer. Laney, I'm not sure if I see you on the registration list, so I don't know if you had a different name or not, but you can go ahead and text me if you'd like, and I'll get it sent over. But what other questions do we have on the flex tracking? Okay, got it. Do we have to do the tracking first before the flex? So I would say that tracking is inside of the flex tracking, if that makes sense, Dominic. I thought tracking was an entry point. Yeah, so good call. I probably wasn't clear about that. It, what I would say is that if you're new to this, I would jump to the simplified tracking unless you have a specific reason to be doing like an elimination diet or something like that for specific issues that are pretty rare, honestly. So, um, I would still call simplified tracking as part of this system that you could get in. That was confusing when I mentioned it as a prerequisite. What I was getting at was more so moving to the left side of this flex track method of the intuitive eating and the power plates and things. It's going to be very helpful to have experience with regular tracking, as we went through with like the checklist and things like that, if that makes sense. All right. Well, I think we can wrap it up.